Hey everybody, it's Nick here again for Grayscale Gorilla. I am the Gorilla, and today we're going to play around with the tracer object in Cinema 4D. And what the tracer object does is it allows you to make a spline path based on animation and other objects. So if you have an object flying across the screen, you could have the tracer object trace its path and then use that as a spline to add tails to things, to do a bunch of fun stuff. But basically today what we're going to do is we're going to head into Cinema, we're going to play around with the tracer object, see what it does, and try to make different cool things with it. And then on top of that, I'm going to hand it off to you guys at the end and see what kind of cool stuff you guys can do with the tracer object, and then maybe add them to the comments and try to make some cool stuff today. So let's head on into Cinema 4D, and let me show you how to use the tracer object. So here we are in Cinema. The first thing we need to do is have a bunch of clones and objects and stuff for the tracer to trace. So the first thing we'll do is we'll add a sphere. You know I love my spheres. I'm going to make a little guy, maybe like 5 meters across. And then in your MoGraph tab, you're going to grab the cloner object, and you're going to clone this thing in, let's call it like a radial array or something. All we need are a bunch of clones in a little packet. Right there, is whatever. It's just a little packet of circles. But what we really want to do is randomize this a whole bunch. So we're going to come into the MoGraph tools here and go to the random effector. And all of a sudden, we're getting kind of exactly what we want. But we want a little bit more of it. So I'm going to grab the position parameters in our random effector and kind of move them around. Now, just to be sure, you have to have the cloner effect, object selected when you choose your random effector, because what you want is the random effector in your effectors tab right there. So keep that in mind. We have our random effector, we have our objects flying all around, and now what we want to do is just introduce some animation to this scene so that we can trace the object. And in my content browser, I have the CS tools as one of my favorites. And this is kind of my favorites menu here. You could set that up in your content browser. But anyway, make sure you have CS Tools installed. It's a free package. It's a free set of plugins. What we're going to use is the Vibrate Null 2. It is open. Actually, instead of double-clicking it, I'm going to drag it into our scene here. And then I'm going to add my cloner object to the Vibrate Null. And you'll see what we have here is this whole bunch of kind of particles flying around. I'm just going to pull the camera out a little bit. And if we go to the Vibrate Null, we can actually turn the X and Y and Z down a little bit and only concentrate on just the rotation. And we can actually move our whole thing up a little bit so it's more centered. There we go. So now we have these kind of tumbling spheres, right? And they're all moving around. We can actually go into the Vibrate Null and change how much the amplitude is. So we could really make these things kind of flip and spin around, right? So what does this have to do with the tracer object? Nothing yet. But what we have is a bunch of animation now for these spheres that we can now use the tracer object to trace. So if we come up into the MoGraph menu here and grab a tracer object, what the tracer needs is a trace link. And now it actually grabbed the Vibrate Null, which is not what we want. We actually want the cloner object. And if we tell it to trace the cloner object, you're now seeing what the tracer does. So you can see wherever those spheres go, the tracer object traces its path, right? So what can we do with this? Essentially, what this tracer object is making is a spline. And what we could do with a spline are some pretty fun things with something like a sweep NURB, right? So we can grab a sweep NURB, and then we can come in and grab, let's say, a circle spline. And we really need to make this circle spline really small, maybe like 1 meter across or something. But then we can use the circle spline and the tracer to then trace that path with an actual object. So if we hit render now, you're going to see what we have. We zoom in here. It's kind of a tail going along the edges, the end of our animation. So let's watch that again. Now you can see our viewport did slow down quite a bit. We have a lot of stuff going on, but there are a few things we could do. We can turn down the circle's intermediate points. We could do something like natural, or you know, uniform or something, and we can knock this number down really low, maybe something like 3. And you can see now the viewport is much quicker. So this is kind of what the tracer is kind of built for, these kind of tailing animations for your objects. Now, before we move on and I show you some other things that Tracer does, I wanted to show you something we could really do with the sweep NURBS, which is really cool. We can actually scale down the whole object just by opening up the details here in our sweep NURB and then making kind of this ramp, maybe even something more like this. We now kind of have this, I don't know, maybe spermy kind of animation thing going down where these tails kind of thin out. You know, they thin out a little bit. So that's something else you could play around with your sweep NURBS with the tracer in it. And then other things you could do, you know, are like end the growth. So you can actually reduce the growth down and actually have these grow on and do other fun stuff. Remember, everything is animatable in Cinema, and almost everything you can play around with. So, you know, play around with these sliders sometimes and see what you can do and what kind of stuff you could play with. But that's again, that's the basics of the tracer object. Now, what I've been using the tracer object for is something a little bit different, and let me show you what that is. Actually, before we move on, let's make sure we have something sexy to look at. As nice as these little gray things are, let's make something nice. The first thing we need to do, we need to go in our render settings and go to output and make this 16 by 9 because my viewport is more of a 16 by 9 looking thing. In fact, I'll move that over. So now we have some 16 by 9 rolling. Some other things we could do, actually I got to move it back over, are get a background. So I'm going to go grab a background. We did this, I think, in the distortion tutorial, but I'll just do it really quickly here. You can add a gradient to the color. Go to circular. I'm going to make the center white and then the edges kind of just off white. And what we get is this really natural, just gradient kind of thing. So now if we hit render, we're starting to get these dark edges. Now the last thing we need to fix are these things are white instead of black. So we just need to make a black texture. Open that up. Make things black. Add it to, we could add it to our cloner object, which will make our kind of head things black, but we can also add it to our sweep NURBS that'll make our trace object black. And I'm just going to get rid of one last thing, which is this specular, so it's just a pure black object. So now we have something a little bit cooler to play with, kind of a nicer looking scene. Let's see what else we can make with the tracer. One thing I'm going to do is come in here to our vibrate null and just kind of turn things down a little bit. Just so we get kind of less wobble. Now, all we have to do to see some other options that the tracer object does is come into the tracer, and instead of saying trace paths, just go down to connect all objects. And what you get now is the tracer, instead of tracing the animation all around, is actually just connecting each clone to the other one. We're getting a little bit kind of a weird thing because we still have that stuff going on with the sweep NURBS right here. So I'm just going to crank the scale up just so our lines are all thick again. There we go. And now the sweep NURB, along with the circle and the tracer, are connecting all the dots from our cloner object. And what's really nice about this is as the clones move around, they all kind of stick together and make this little orb kind of weird, you know, buckyball kind of shape or something like that. Some fun things we could do here to animate and play around with is up the count. So you can actually see as we go up, it's kind of doing this weird spinny thing. It's just part of the random effector. So we can actually animate this and have a whole bunch of these kind of fly on and animate. That might be fun. Some other things to check too is while we're here, there's this option to connect the two of the ends. You could actually see them right here. It kind of starts with ball number 1, goes around the clones, and ends on ball number whatever 20, right? But there's a checkbox to connect these 1 and 20 together so that it's always a complete loop, and that is in the tracer object. You want to go to let's see, nodes only, trace active, connect all objects, space. Where did I see that thing? Close spline. Thank you. There it is. Close spline. Bam. Right there is. We'll connect those together. So now, when you hit play, you're going to see everything's connected. And then this looks again really cool if we up our count. And we get these really crazy objects. We could actually zoom out and get these really nice abstract kind of shape things. Now, some other things to play with. Now, things are moving around, but they're not very organic. It's really stiff, kind of lunar module landing kind of thing going on. But if we go to the cloner object, and again, we're just playing around, and we come down and try this formula effector out. What the formula effector does is it just kind of moves things based on this formula. And what I want it to do is not necessarily move the scale of objects, but the position. And not just in the X position, but all over. I want this formula effector to kind of do this randomy thing. And it's a little too much, so we can actually just come up here and turn it down. And what all this does is it just gives us a little bit more of a wobble. I think it's a little bit more organic, you know what I mean? So we kind of have this, I don't know, fun little spidery ball thing going. And then from here, again, to play around, we can actually make, separate textures for our clones and our stripes. So we could actually come into the clones and do something like, I want bright orange spheres with black lines going between them. And let's say we can grab the spheres and crank up the scale or something like that. And we can kind of get this really colorful kind of thing going on. And let's say we want some really crazy reflection. And I'm just going to add a, not gradient, but a Fresnel shader to our reflections. And of course, we have nothing to reflect. So quickly, I'll just go to the light kit here, which I have installed, just to get an HDRI. Now, if you have an HDRI, you could set up a sky and add your HDRI to it. But what we have here is the HDRI sky that comes with the the Grayscale Gorilla Light Kit Pro. What I could do now is click on HDR file and just go ahead and pick something with some reflections, maybe even this Softbox Studio here. Now open that up. I'm going to say seen by camera, no. And now these spheres have something to reflect off of. In fact, if we kind of zoom in, you could see all the lighting and stuff that's going on. Now we do have to turn up the anti-aliasing just because we are working with reflections now. So we could set it to best, and 1x1 by 2x2 is a good starting point for this. And that's looking pretty cool. So now we have all these spheres connected with all these lines, and we're starting to get these really cool kind of shaped things. Something else we could do actually is add another sphere and then color these spheres separately. So I'm just duplicating the texture here and going to color and making a separate color for the other sphere. And once we do that, you're going to see the way that it clones every other object together. So now we have this fun kind of molecule kind of thing going on that looks really fun, and it has some reflections going on, and everything's connected. And again, we can go really crazy with the formula effector and really crank it up to get, actually, here's our strength, to get some really crazy animation going, which I really like. Or you can tone it down. Some other things you could do is move the camera inside of this. And for this one, for something like this, I'd probably grab an actual camera, not just the display camera. grab a real camera and play with the focal length. Like a big wide angle lens, something like 9-10 degrees or 9 or 10 millimeters here, can get you some really crazy abstract stuff going on, especially toward the edges. It kind of moves around. Now you can really see this as these things come toward the camera and move around. So maybe there's something here that's really fun to play with, have these little weird little shapes going down. What else can we do? Let's do one more kind of fun thing. Of course, you don't have to use spheres. I love my spheres, but of course you can pull out any one of these objects, even like this torus here. We could just shrink it down and make sure it's small enough, but then use that as part of our cloner object. And maybe instead of the spheres, we have all these torus things kind of floating around. We can also add in our random effector some rotation, so they're not all aiming the same way. And if I just move over and in our random, so you could see we could actually rotate those torus around. And let's just give them one of these textures here. And now we have this crazy abstract, you know, I don't know, it's like a mobile or something like that. Something really fun to just play with and animate. And of course we can do one last thing, which is really stretch these out and make almost a really crazy spiderweb type of situation where there's different things attached. That's cool. I like that. And then we can add a sphere into the mix and have other stuff go down. And then one last thing, I'm feeling it. I'm feeling inspired. Let's grab, oh, I don't know. Let's go with capsule. Shrink it. Maybe we'll leave this a little large, and we'll just add black to the tips of the capsule. So now we have this kind of interesting candy shape thing going on with different scales, different sizes, and there's animation going on. Really fun stuff with the tracer object. So that's it with the tracer object. It's just something I've been playing around with lately, and I wanted to share with you guys how to set that up for your scene and how to play around with it. So, you know, now it's your turn. So go ahead and open up Cinema, follow along, and play with the tracer object, and really try some crazy stuff. What if you add some deformers to the tracer object? Or what if you don't use it with sweep NURBS? Maybe you use it with another set of NURBS or another way to use a stroke or a spline. But anyway, if you're playing around and you come up with something great, kick out a render or an animation and drop it in the comments below, and we could talk about it and see what other cool stuff we can make with the tracer. So that's it for today. And thank you very much for watching, everybody. Can't wait to see what you guys make with it. And I'll see you in another tutorial real soon. Have a good one, guys. Bye.